My name's Luke, and I'm 30-8 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and the price of being too generous. I work in logistics, managing high-level inventory and transportation operations for a major distribution company. I've been with the same company for 11 years, building my reputation one successful project at a time. Last fall, everything seemed to be falling into place. I was offered a transfer from our Cincinnati office to Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a promotion, more money, more responsibility, and honestly, I was proud of it. I'd worked incredibly hard to earn that opportunity. The move wasn't immediate though. My start date in Raleigh was about 8 weeks out, which gave me time to finish some big projects, prepare for the relocation, and line up housing down there. During this transition period, I planned to work remotely from home. I had a solid system in place, a dedicated office, an encrypted company laptop, and a storage cabinet with locked drawers for files and client contracts. I took my work security seriously because I had to. That's when my wife Denise approached me with what seemed like a reasonable request. Her parents were going through a rough patch. Her dad Martin had been laid off from his HVAC job, and her mom Patty had her hours cut at the diner where she worked. They were falling behind on bills and were dangerously close to losing their house. Denise asked if they could stay with us for a couple of months, just until they figured things out. We had a detached guest house out back. 1 bedroom, small bathroom, a kitchenette. We mainly used it for storage and occasional visitors. I told Denise they could move and rent minus free just until they got back on their feet. It felt like the right thing to do, the kind of gesture that defines who you are as a person. I never imagined how catastrophically wrong I was. They moved in quickly, like within days. And they brought a ton of stuff, way more than I expected for a temporary stay. Martin immediately took over the little patio out back and started calling it his porch. Patty began coming into our main house every morning under the pretense of saying hello, but somehow always managed to leave a trail of dishes, crumbs, and dirty mugs behind. At first, I ignored these small violations. I was busy with work, focused on my upcoming transfer, and I figured their behavior was just stress-related. Denise kept defaming them, saying they were just going through a hard time and I needed to be patient. But then Martin started helping himself to my tools. First it was a screwdriver, then a power drill. He'd just leave things scattered in the yard after using them. I politely asked him not to take anything from my office or garage without asking. He'd smile and say, "Relax, I put it back." But he didn't. The violations kept escalating, and I started to realize that my reasonable request was being completely ignored. Then came the Friday that changed everything. I was out for maybe 40-5 minutes picking up takeout for dinner. When I got back, I noticed something immediately wrong. The door to my home office was wide open, which was unusual because I always kept it closed. I walked toward it and froze. The room was completely empty. I mean, completely cleaned out. My desk, files, laptop, shelves, everything was gone. My framed diplomas were off the wall. Even my rolling chair was missing. I stood there in absolute shock, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just my office, this was my secure workspace with confidential client information, encrypted files, and contracts that weren't even supposed to leave company premises. I walked straight to the kitchen where I found Denise scrolling through her phone. I asked her what the hell had happened to my office. She looked up casually and said, "Oh, my dad cleared it out. He thought it would help with packing." She said it like it was nothing, like someone had just rearranged furniture. I thought she had to be joking. She wasn't. I asked her why anyone would clear out my active home office, the workspace I was using every single day for my job. She shrugged and said, "You're moving soon. It's not a big deal." That phrase, "it's not a big deal," would haunt our conversations for weeks to come. I went outside to the guest house where Martin was sitting in a lawn chair, watching some game on his phone and drinking a beer like he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't even bother with pleasantries. I asked him what the hell had happened to my office. He didn't miss a beat. "Figured I'd help you pack," he said. "Didn't think you needed all that stuff anymore." The casual arrogance in his voice was stunning. I asked where my work-issued laptop was, where my files were, where my contracts were. He said they were somewhere in a storage unit. When I asked which storage unit, he couldn't remember the exact name. "It's one of those places near Route 28, he said. "It's safe." My stomach dropped. That laptop contained encrypted client files and contracts that hadn't even been finalized yet. I had papers in there I wasn't supposed to print, let alone store in some random public storage unit that this man couldn't even properly identify. Patty popped her head out at that moment and said, "Some of that stuff looked old anyway. It was just cluttering the room." I looked back at Martin, and he was actually laughing. "Don't freak out," he said. "It's all in boxes. You can go grab it whenever." When I explained to Denise that this could get me fired, that there were serious security protocols being violated, she rolled her eyes and said, "You always overreact to things. They were just trying to help. It wasn't that serious." That moment right there broke something fundamental in me. The complete dismissal of a legitimate crisis, the refusal to acknowledge the severity of what had happened, the automatic defense of people who had violated my most basic boundaries. I walked upstairs, grabbed my wallet and keys, and walked out the door. I didn't even pack clothes. I drove down on -75 and checked into a lock-winning inn. I didn't answer Denise's calls or texts that night. The next day, she texted you being dramatic. "Come home and we'll figure it out." I didn't respond. Instead, I took the day off work and contacted corporate to report a possible security breach. I had to tell my boss that I'd lost access to my laptop, that it was currently in the hands of people who didn't even understand what encryption meant or why it mattered. They were not happy. I was immediately put under investigation, pending recovery of the files and confirmation that no client information had been exposed or compromised. When I asked Martin for the name of the storage unit again, he gave me the wrong information. I spent 2 entire days driving around checking local storage facilities until I finally found the right one. Sure enough, my laptop was inside a cardboard box underneath some random junk. One corner of the screen was cracked. The rest of my files were dumped into random bins with no organization whatsoever. I took everything, locked it in my trunk, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. I told her everything that had happened. She looked at me and asked a simple question: "Do you want to fix this marriage, or are you done?" I didn't answer right away because, honestly, I didn't know. But what happened next helped me decide. I stayed at that hotel for over a week. Denise called twice a day for the first few days, then the calls slowed down. Her last voicemail said, "I don't get why you're punishing me for something my parents did. You're being cold." I couldn't respond because I was still cleaning up the mess they had created. The IT department at work confirmed that my laptop had been logged into after I left the house that Friday. It wasn't me. Martin had actually tried to access my work laptop. Fortunately, the system locked him out after 3 failed login attempts, but the attempt had been logged. I told my boss the full story. I was written up and warned that if anything like this happened again, I'd be terminated immediately. I didn't feel angry at work. I felt embarrassed, like I'd been professionally exposed because I couldn't control my personal life. Meanwhile, I'd heard nothing from Martin or Patty. Not an apology, not a phone call, just complete silence. Denise sent a few vague texts about how it's hard on everyone and we should all cool off. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I decided to go back to the house, thinking maybe I could have a rational conversation with Denise face to face. I arrived around 7 in the evening. The front porch light was on, her car was in the driveway, everything looked normal. I knocked on the door. Nobody answered. I opened it and walked in, and there they were. All 3 of them, Martin, Patty, and Denise, sitting in the living room reading takeout and watching a movie like absolutely nothing had happened. They all looked up at me like I was interrupting their evening entertainment. Denise barely blinked and just said, "Hey." Martin actually smirked and said, "Look who finally showed up." I asked Denise if we could talk privately. She sighed like I was inconveniencing her and followed me into the kitchen. I told her I wanted them out of the house. She immediately crossed her arms and said, "They have nowhere else to go." I don't care. They crossed the line. They interfered with my work. They could have ruined everything. And you defended them. She rolled her eyes and gave me that phrase again: "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." That was her go-2 response now. It wasn't that serious. It's not a big deal. So I decided to make it very serious and a very big deal. I spoke to a lawyer. I said, "I'm filing for separation. If they're still here by the end of the week, I'm also starting the eviction process." Her jaw dropped. "You're seriously doing this?" "You don't listen," I told her. "You've chosen them over me over and over again. I'm done." She stormed out of the kitchen and slammed the door behind her. I didn't follow her. I went upstairs, grabbed more of my clothes, my backup hard drive, and a few personal items, then I left. 3 days later, I had my lawyer file the separation papers. That's when things started to get really ugly. I got a call from Denise's younger sister Megan, absolutely screaming at me for abandoning family and making her parents homeless. I stayed calm and told her to talk to Denise, not me. She hung up on me. Then the online character assassination started. Martin made a Facebook post claiming I was kicking an elderly couple out onto the street and that I had abandoned his daughter during the hardest time in her life. He painted me as some cold, heartless monster who left his wife and in minus laws to rot. Some of my extended family who didn't know the whole story started messaging me too. My cousin X did, dude, why are you putting your wife through this? I stayed quiet. I wasn't going to fight this battle on social media, but I documented everything. Screenshots, text messages, call logs. My lawyer told me they want to turn this into a guilt show. Don't play along. Denise never responded to the official separation papers right away. Instead, she kept acting like this was just a temporary bump in the road, something we'd work through eventually. That changed when she actually got officially served with the papers. That's when she finally showed up at my new apartment. She looked tired, angry, and desperate. She said she wanted to fix things that we could make this work. I asked her one simple question: if your parents had done this to your job, your files, your privacy, would you be okay with it? She didn't answer. I told her we could discuss reconciliation after her parents were out of my house and after she acknowledged what had really happened and why it was wrong. Until then, I had nothing to say to her. That night, Martin left me a voicemail. You think you're better than us? You think you're gonna win this? You made a big mistake, son. That's when I knew they weren't going to back down. They weren't going to leave quietly. They were going to make this as difficult and destructive as possible. So I decided to push back, and I decided to push back hard. What they didn't realize was that I had receipts, legal ones, and I was completely done playing nice. Martin's voicemail flipped a switch in me. It wasn't just disrespect anymore, it was a direct threat. I sent the recording to my lawyer first. She said, this just helps your case. Let them keep talking. Over the next few days, I started collecting everything systematically. Bank statements showing I'd been paying all the utilities for the guest house. Receipts for all the groceries I'd bought them. Security camera footage from the day they cleared out my office. Even email correspondence with my boss explaining the security breach and its fallout. My lawyer said if they want to play dirty, we'll bury them in facts. That same week, I filed an official eviction notice. They had 30 days to vacate the guest house. Denise didn't take it well. She texted me constantly, you're turning this into a war. They're your family too. You're blowing up our life over some papers. I stopped replying to her messages entirely. Then something else happened that showed me just how far they were willing to go. I got an email from HR saying that someone had contacted my company's anonymous tip line and accused me of mishandling client data and violating work-minus from Marna's home policies. The complaint included specific details, information that only someone who had been inside my house would know. Details about what kind of documents I worked on, what equipment I used, how my office was set up. I knew immediately it was Martin. I called my boss and explained everything. He said they were already investigating and had pulled my email logs, access records, and the internal security report I'd filed 2 weeks earlier. I'm not going to lie, he said, this whole situation is messy. But so far, you've done everything by the book. I hung up the phone and my hands were shaking. They weren't just trying to inconvenience me or stay in my house. They were actively trying to destroy my career out of pure spite. I told my lawyer what had happened. She started preparing for the worst-case scenario, said we could file a restraining order if needed. She told me to change all my passwords, check my credit reports, freeze my accounts. She was absolutely right to be concerned because 3 days later, I got a fraud alert from Capital One. Someone had tried to open a new credit card in my name using my personal information. I was done playing defense. I hired a private investigator. Not some shady guy sitting in a car, but an actual licensed PI who specialized in domestic cases, digital evidence, and family fraud. He went to the guest house the following week, pretending to be someone from a community outreach program offering employment assistance for struggling seniors. Martin talked to him for 40-5 minutes. He bragged about being retired early thanks to family, laughed about putting the boy in his place. The entire conversation was legally recorded. Meanwhile, Denise showed up at my apartment again, this time crying. I didn't know he did that with the credit card, she said. I swear I didn't know. I believed her barely. She looked genuinely broken. But it didn't change anything fundamental about our situation. You let them tear apart my life, I told her, and you stood there and watched. You never said no to them. You never defended me once. She begged me to come to marriage counseling, promised that her parents would leave if I just gave them more time. I told her they'd leave when the sheriff showed up to enforce the eviction, and without saying another word, I closed the door. A few days later, I went back to the house with my lawyer and the locksmith. We took detailed photographs of the guest house, documenting the damage, the trash, the furniture they'd taken from our main house and moved into theirs. They had relocated our old couch into the guest house. My desktop computer was sitting there with the screen cracked and the case pried open. We filed a comprehensive police report. That finally shook them. Martin called me late that night and left a voicemail that sounded much more rattled than his previous threatening message. "All right, man, you made your point. You want to win, you win. Just give us a little more time." I didn't reply. The legal clock was already ticking, and I had more planned than they realized. The day the sheriff showed up with the eviction order, Martin finally realized I wasn't bluffing. It was 8:15 in the morning on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my car parked across the street, coffee in hand, engine running, watching the whole thing unfold. I watched as the county deputy knocked on the guest house door with the official eviction notice in hand. Patty opened the door, hair a mess, eyes wide with shock. Martin stepped into view a second later, puffed up like an angry balloon, still wearing his white tank top and boxer shorts. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations. The sheriff handed them the notice, told them they had 40-8 hours to vacate the premises, period. They could contest it in court if they wanted, but it wouldn't stop the eviction process. I watched from my car as they both stood there on the porch, completely stunned, their little kingdom crumbling around them. Patty looked like she might cry. Martin just looked like someone had slapped all the air out of him. I didn't feel guilty. Not for a single second. 2 days later, they were gone. I didn't even see them leave. My PI had positioned a camera on the back gate, and all it caught was Martin loading up a U-Haul truck and driving off in the middle of the night like some kind of fugitive. They left garbage everywhere. Dirty laundry, cigarette butts, broken furniture. The guest house smelled like mold and marijuana, but they were gone, and that was all that mattered to me. Denise moved in with a friend from work. She sent me a long email finally admitting that she had mishandled the situation. She didn't exactly apologize, but she said she never realized how bad things had gotten and hoped we could still salvage our marriage. But I was already completely done. I responded with one line, "There's nothing left to salvage." I filed for divorce the next day. Now here's where the karma part really cheats in. Remember how I hired that private investigator? Well, he kept digging even after the eviction was complete. I asked him to look into any public records, credit fraud cases, housing history, background checks, just in case there were other victims or patterns. He discovered that Martin had pulled the exact same routine 3 years earlier with Patty's sister in Indiana. The whole out of work, need a place to stay performance. He'd lived in her basement for 8 months. When she finally tried to get them out, he threatened to sue her for elder abuse. He never followed through with the lawsuit, but he scared her enough that she just gave up and moved to a different state. That case was fully documented in small claims court records. He'd done this before. It was an established pattern of behavior, a systematic way of exploiting family connections and manipulating guilt to avoid consequences. We sent all of this documentation to the police. The credit card fraud case got tied directly back to them. Denise, to her credit, admitted under oath that she didn't know about the fraudulent application. But the investigation revealed Martin's fingerprints all over it, literally and figuratively. He got officially charged with identity theft and attempted fraud. Patty wasn't charged criminally, but she was named in the investigation as a co-conspirator. Martin eventually took a plea deal, community service, probation, hefty fines. He didn't go to jail, but he now has a permanent criminal record, and it's all public information. They can't pull this scheme again without serious legal consequences. I replaced everything in my home office. New locks, new desk, new laptop on the company's expense account after I proved conclusively that none of the confidential files had been compromised. I kept my job, and I even got a performance bonus for how quickly and professionally I handled such a difficult situation. But I didn't stop there. You see, I still had one more thing to reclaim my reputation. Martin had completely trashed me all over Facebook. He called me a backstabber, a man who couldn't protect his family, a snake who abandoned people in their time of need. His friends, people I didn't even know, had shared his posts and added their own commentary about what a terrible person I was. So I made one post. Just one. A public Facebook post with screenshots and documentation. Photos of my cleared minus out office. The official eviction notice. The PI's video footage of Martin bragging about his scheme. The police report for credit card fraud. A screenshot of the court case docket with Martin's name and charges listed. I kept it completely factual, no emotional language, no personal attacks. Just the documented truth, laid out chronologically with evidence. It went everywhere. Friends who had initially taken their side messaged me apologizing profusely. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years wrote to say they had no idea what had really happened. Even Megan, Denise's sister who had screamed at me on the phone, reached out to admit she'd been completely wrong about the situation. Martin deleted his entire Facebook account within 24 hours. Patty tried calling me repeatedly. I didn't answer. Denise showed up at my office one afternoon in tears. She said she didn't recognize the man she had married anymore, that I'd become someone cold and calculating. I told her, you never really knew me at all. You knew the version of me that never had to defend himself. We finalized the divorce 3 months later. No alimony, no complicated property split. She walked away with essentially nothing. She'd quit her job during all the drama and moved in with various friends. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working part-time at a local bakery, struggling to rebuild her life from scratch. I kept the house in the guest house. I cleaned it out completely, renovated it properly, and now I rent it to a retired firefighter and his wife. They pay their rent on time every month. They shovel the snow in winter without being asked. Sometimes they bring me homemade cookies just because they appreciate having a good landlord. I sleep better now. Way better than I have in years. Here's what I learned from all of this: helping family is absolutely a good thing, but there's always a line. And when people show you who they really are through their actions, not their words, you need to believe them. Because if you don't, if you keep making excuses and giving second chances to people who fundamentally don't respect you, they'll burn your entire life down and then call it kindness. I gave them everything I could. Free housing, free utilities, free groceries, patience, understanding, the benefit of the doubt. And they turned around and systematically tried to destroy me. So I made sure that by the end of it all, they had nothing left to take from anyone else. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stop being the nice guy and start being the guy who protects himself. Sometimes wisdom isn't about forgiveness or turning the other cheek. Sometimes wisdom is about recognizing predators and making sure they face real consequences for their actions. That's my story. That's how I learned the difference between helping people and enabling people who will never stop taking until you force them to stop.